Hi guys, the title of the title you see on the screen today. Don't forget to like and subscribe and we'll get started.
The story begins on the street of a very good and expensive palace. A girl was standing there and saw some unfamiliar people. One of the men came forward, and behind him stood the maids. The boy bowed, thereby welcoming her to the Chadla estate. However, this girl stood still and did not say a single word. She was surprised, because this man called her Princess Fiora Tiana Dedeman. The girl did not understand why he called her that, nor what estate she was in. However, after thinking for a while, she realized that this was all from a story called The Children and the Duke, which she had read quite recently. This was the family of the main character, whose name was Bardus Chudl. The girl was simply furious when she found out about this. She did not understand what was happening, and because of this, she was incredibly angry. And she was angry because she realized that she ended up in the body of a villain who was supposed to be rejected by the main character. She was the same Fiora who was not the best and most positive character in the book. In fact, before she found herself in the body of a villain, she was a very ordinary kindergarten teacher. In her world, she accompanied children when they were picked up by their parents and praised some of them. However, at that moment, one of the boys who saw something on the road immediately ran there. Mom could not stop him. She only asked him to stop because they should hold hands when crossing the road. But the boy didn't care. He was running straight towards the road. Of course, the teacher, as soon as she saw this, immediately realized that trouble was near, because a huge truck was flying straight towards him. So, without thinking twice, she made a fatal decision. The girl ran to this boy and pushed him in the other direction from the bus, and she ended up in his place. Of course, the truck couldn't stop, and so the poor girl ended up under its impact. The last thing she heard before she died was the screams of worried parents, as well as the cries of children who saw the death of their teacher. She heard everyone calling her name as she gradually lost consciousness. But that was where her memories of her past life ended after she moved into history. Of course, she didn't regret saving that boy at all, but she didn't understand why. Having done a good deed for a little person, she ended up becoming the antagonist of the story. Of course, Fiora was one of the main characters in the novel The Children and the Duke. But she was the evil bride of the main character, whose name was Bardus. This cruel woman constantly tortured innocent children. And the maid, whose name was Lear, was the main character and noticed this vile behavior. Fiora kidnapped her and locked her up in an attempt to silence her so that she would not have time to report her behavior with the children to anyone. However, justice, of course, prevailed, and Fiora was executed as punishment for all the evil deeds she had committed. The girl never wanted to feel those chilling sensations from her own death at the moment of the accident again. They were simply disgusting to her. But having accepted the situation, she thought that perhaps if she was not so cruel and could take care of these children, then she would surely be able to survive. In any case, Fiora was supposed to fade into the background when the main character showed up and married Baritas, and the fate of being rejected didn't really frighten the girl at all. She thought that maybe she could just hang out in that world, not get too involved with the main character, leave him on good terms, and get some money when the main character showed up, and then she would just leave and everyone would forget about her. She figured that she would be able to use this money to open her own kindergarten. Even in the new world, she was going to have good relationships with children, thereby earning her living. When this was to happen, the girl would be able to secretly provide for these sweet children, whom she had been caring for from the very beginning. Of course, she decided for herself never to be an evil bride. She was going to become a kind teacher for these beautiful children. This is the best decision for everyone. Soon after this, the children whom she was supposed to be raising also came to the girl. And as soon as she saw them, she could not hold back the smile on her face. They were two beautiful boys. They were incredibly beautiful with ruby-colored eyes. They bowed and greeted Her Highness. Fiora even thought that she simply went to heaven after death, because these beautiful children even smiled at her. After that, 3 more beautiful girls approached her. One of them said hello and said that her name was Lemon. The other 2 girls simply greeted her and said that they were very pleased to meet her. The youngest of the ladies held a bouquet in her hands just for the woman. Fiora couldn't contain her emotions. It was too much for her. They were too beautiful and even vanilla in a way. This sweetness was even enough to fall into a diabetic coma. It was also completely incomprehensible to the woman how the original character of this story could oppress these beautiful little girls. But she tried to restrain herself and not to rush to hug all these children. She understood that she was absolutely not cut out as a person for the role of a villain. She would like to stay with these beautiful children forever because they are incredibly cute, beautiful, and wonderful. In her mind, she turned to the Duke and was going to do whatever he wanted in order to leave him for good purposes and spend as much time as possible with the children. So she would really like the Duke to hire her as their nanny or something like that, because she would like to interact with these beautiful children and guide them on the right path. Soon they entered the estate, and the girl suddenly felt someone tugging at her sleeve. She immediately turned around to see who it was. As soon as she looked down, she immediately saw a small baby who, looking at her with a pitiful look, asked Fiora to take her in her arms. The girl noticed the color of her hair. It was purple, and she immediately realized that it was Jasmine. Fiora immediately picked her up. However, at that moment, a boy with red hair approached them and asked her to stop doing that, because this woman was their guest. The girl immediately replied that everything was perfectly fine because Jasmine was probably tired. Therefore, it was not at all difficult for her to carry her. The boy then changed the subject. He said that they had completely forgotten to introduce themselves. So, asking her forgiveness, he said that he was the eldest child, Thomas. After that, the girl with brown hair spoke up, saying that she was his younger sister, Ren. After that, a girl with blonde hair spoke up. She was her younger sister, whose name was Lemon. And at the very end, a guy with green hair introduced himself. He was her brother, Green. Thomas also said that the baby she picked up was named Jasmine, and she was the youngest of them all. Fiora smiled and thanked him for telling her all this. But at that moment, a rough male voice was heard, and all the children immediately turned in the other direction, frozen in horror. This voice actually addressed them and asked if they had already forgotten what they had promised before. This man turned out to be the main character of the story, Baritas. The man who came down from the second floor said that a very important guest would soon arrive and they should sit in their rooms. Of course, the girl immediately recognized this man, and this made her feel a little uneasy because he looked rather stern. He had warm, raven-like hair and ruby-colored eyes. The girl, meanwhile, immediately handed over poor Jasmine to the maid, who burst into tears and looked in his direction. Meanwhile, the man came closer to her and, taking her hand, kissed her, also asking for forgiveness for being a little late. After this, Baritas bowed and said that he was very glad to see her, and also introduced himself by giving his name. At that moment, the girl simply stood and remained silent, but when she saw his stern gaze on her, she immediately realized that she had to answer something. So, curtsying back to him, she gave her name and said she was very glad to be there. After this, he bowed again and asked the girl for forgiveness for the fact that his relatives could bother her. Fiora smiled and said that he had nothing to apologize for because they were incredibly sweet children, and she was even happy to spend this time with them. But the man, meanwhile, looked angrily at the children who were standing behind him and said that they had broken the promise they had made. Ren was very upset about this. She hung her head down and said that he was talking about being late, so they decided to just meet the princess so she wouldn't be lonely. The man breathed a sigh of relief. He was no longer as stern, but he still said that it didn't mean they could disobey him like that. Baritas replied that he wished that such a thing would never happen again, because they should always listen to their older brother. The children, sadly hanging their heads down, said that, of course, they would do everything and would never do such a thing again, and also wished them a good time. Before they left, Fiora patted the older girl on the head and wished them a good time too. After this, the maid took the children away, and the man, holding out the girl's hand forward, asked if she would allow him to accompany her like this. Of course, the girl did not object, and soon they arrived in his office, where the maids had already prepared tea and treats. This place was still incredible. It looked like a huge art gallery. So as the girl walked through the corridors, she could not take her eyes off the walls. And for that hour spent with the cookies that were served to her, she was ready to even give her life, because she had never tasted anything so delicious. The man was very concerned about the girl's comfort and asked if everything was to her liking. Fiora smiled and said that of course everything was just great. But then she suddenly became wary, and she became interested in how she looked from the outside, and also what was going on with her facial expression. After a moment of silence, Barita said that the engagement was to take place in about a month. Even though it was a marriage of convenience, he was still going to try his best for it. The girl smiled and said that she was very grateful for such warm words, and she thought about the fact that there was only a month left. Time was clearly not on her side, but she did not attach much importance to this. Fiora knew that she would not have to marry him. She would simply have to delay the wedding as long as possible so that she could prepare the ground for her future life. After some time, the man began to get up from his seat, saying that it would be better for both of them to rest. He also said that the head butler would be in their office very soon to show her absolutely everything. And before they parted, the man asked her for forgiveness for the fact that he could not take care of it personally. He simply still had some things that needed to be resolved urgently. Yes, the girl with a smile on her face immediately said that he didn't have to worry about it, because everything was fine. Barita still asked her for forgiveness, and also said that if she suddenly needed something, she could tell the butler about it. He would do everything right away. Fiora thanked him for this, and before leaving, she asked if she could spend time with his brothers and sisters. The man replied that, of course, she could do it if they decided so themselves. The girl said that this was certainly true, but she still felt that she should ask their guardian's permission first. Barita's, upon hearing this, immediately looked her straight in the eye and asked if it was true that she liked children very much. The girl, upon hearing this, immediately said that like is a completely inappropriate word because she simply adores children and is ready to spend every minute of her life with them. The man didn't change his expression at all when he heard this. He just turned around and said that he understood everything. He also said that it was time for him to leave and wished that the girl would at least get some rest that day after the journey. After he left, the girl was left alone and could not understand why he would even ask such a thing. She could not even believe that he perceived her as Fiora from the original story. However, the girl had to put all her panic aside. She was a caring teacher to the core, so those children were in good hands and no one should worry at all. After Baritas left, a butler named Crimson showed the girl absolutely all the surroundings and gave her a short tour of the palace. She also learned that her room was on the second floor, and it turned out to be simply incredibly luxurious. Even the door handles there looked like pieces of priceless treasures. However, this was not at all important. Fiora realized that she would be able to see the children simply through the window, and this was wonderful for her. The girl was also introduced to two maids whose names were Leona and Lida. These were two charming girls who were supposed to help her. Her first order to these maids was to bring her a pen and paper. She was to write down absolutely everything she remembered about the children and the Duke. She had to write down all the important information that would help her survive there. So as soon as the maids brought everything, she immediately began to write down the information she remembered about herself first. She was the third child and the princess of the Doublet Empire, but she wasn't sure if she remembered correctly, since she could also have been the second child. But in any case, among the knights there was a man named Gray and a minor character named Dayton, who were later to betray the Duke. The girl believed that if she could convert them to her side, her chances of survival would increase significantly. But she couldn't understand, even after all this time, why Gray had betrayed the Duke. She had to remember all the details in order to properly negotiate with this man. No matter how hard she tried to remember everything, she couldn't do it at all. She only remembered her favorite moments with the kids, the picnic with the main character and all that. But she couldn't remember the most important moments at all. Of course, she could not have known in the past that her life would depend on some insignificant details, so she did not pay attention to them and tried to read as quickly as possible in order to move on to more interesting moments for herself. But Fiora tried to calm herself down. She knew there was nothing to be afraid of, because all she needed to do was take good care of the children and lay low so as not to attract unnecessary attention to herself. She closed her diary, writing down the most basic information, and thought that maybe later she would be able to collect all the missing pieces and everything would work out. Fiora then lay down on her bed and felt how tired she was, which was surprising to her because she had done almost nothing. The girl was absolutely sure that the next day would be no less difficult, especially because she did not know what to expect. At that moment, she felt how much she missed her dear mother. When evening came, the maids came into her room and, turning to Her Highness, said that the Duke wanted her to join him for dinner. When they saw her face, they immediately said that if she felt uncomfortable, she could stay, and that it was completely forgivable. As soon as Fiora heard this, she immediately understood why they assumed such a thing. She was all in tears, as was her pillow. The girl also guessed that her face was most likely completely swollen due to her crying. But after getting out of bed, she bowed and said that everything was fine, and also asked them for help. The maid, bowing to her, said that, of course, they would do everything that was necessary, and immediately began to correct the situation that had happened to the princess. The girl, sitting in front of the mirror while her hair was being tidied up and her face was being painted, tried to encourage herself. She said that she had to be strong because she couldn't let the plan fail. She died, of course, but in the end she was given a second chance. Sure, it was hard for the girl to realize that she was a villain, but this was her chance, and she had to give it her all this time to live the life she dreamed of. Some time had passed since then, and Fiora was finally dressed and fully prepared. She immediately went down to the banquet hall, where the man was already waiting for her. The butler immediately introduced the girl. As soon as she entered, she immediately curtsied when she saw her future husband, and then she realized that she could definitely handle it. She would become a nanny for the ducal family, and she would cope well with this role. The man paid no attention to her appearance at all, but pointed to the chair next to him and told her to sit down already. Fiora thanked him and then took her seat. But when she looked around, she noticed that they were the only ones and did not understand why the children were not present at this dinner. She herself came to that dinner only to see those beautiful little ones again, so she was a little upset when they weren't there. Soon a maid came to her and put a plate on the table. There was meat, gravy, and everything as needed. The girl immediately thanked her. As soon as the girl started eating the food, the man immediately wished her bon appetit. She, smiling, wished him the same. But in fact, she began to panic and put the cutlery aside because she had absolutely no understanding of any rules of table etiquette. After all, it is difficult in the ordinary modern world where these rules have long been forgotten. But as soon as she picked up the cutlery, she immediately began to calmly cut off a piece of steak that was lying on her plate and was incredibly surprised. She did it all as if she knew the rules by heart, like the back of her hand. But it was quite obvious because she repeated everything that Fiora had done before. It was like muscle memory. It was all there. She had been right-handed all her life, but now for the first time she held a knife in her left hand, and this was something new for her, and quite interesting. Soon, after a short silence, the man asked if she had already had time to inspect their estate. Fiora paused from her meal and said that not at all. She was too tired from the journey, so she only watched part of it and decided to rest a little in her room. Baridas then asked her to let him show him around the area after dinner. The girl happily agreed and said that it was very kind of him. And after that, they continued their meal in complete silence, if you don't count the various announcements from the maids. There was just a deathly silence, which made the girl even more worried. However, she still prayed that this dinner would never end. And all because even that awkward silence was much better for her than walking around the estate with only the Duke when there was not a single soul around. Soon, when they had finished their meal, the man escorted her to parts she had not yet visited, and all the time offered his hand when needed. But when Fiora was going up the stairs and took his hand, she accidentally stepped on her dress because she was not used to such clothes. The girl understood perfectly well that she was about to fall, and because of this she began to worry even more. However, she was unable to influence this situation in any way, so she simply fell straight onto the Duke. They found themselves incredibly close to each other and looked straight into each other's eyes. Fiora moved away from him rather quickly due to the awkwardness of the situation, and he asked if she was hurt. The girl even blushed from embarrassment, but said that everything was fine, thanks to him. He replied that it was very good, and then said that they had just arrived at the place he wanted to show her. And right after that, the doors opened and they went out onto the roof. Fiora was surprised. She didn't understand why she was there and what there was to see there. The man, who was almost at the edge, extended his hand back to her and told her to come closer to him. Fiora had kept her distance the whole time, still feeling awkward about the fall, but soon she came closer to him, and the man, seeing the delighted expression on her face, asked if she liked the view from that roof. The girl was truly delighted. This night view from the roof was simply beautiful and immensely magnificent. She had never seen anything like it in real life. Baritas, pointing to the side, said that the garden was huge and it was easy to get lost there. So if she suddenly wanted to see it, he advised her not to go there alone. The girl nodded her head and said that she would definitely go there someday because she was interested. But from the roof, she could also see a wild forest, and in the center, a tower in which the Duke's residence was located. And it was there, according to the original story, that all the important events in the book took place. She thought that she had to go there because she thought it would help her refresh her memory. However, the man, seeing where she was looking, immediately said that it was better to avoid that tower and the forest at all costs because it could be very dangerous there. Therefore, it was better for her not to even approach that area. Fiora was of course a little upset when she heard this. She didn't understand how he knew she wanted to go there, as if he had read her mind. But she decided that most likely her facial expression said it all. After a short silence, Baritas smiled and said that if she really needed to go there, it would be better to take a member of the order with her. The girl smiled and thanked him, saying that she really appreciated his kindness. They stood there for a while enjoying the view, but soon Fiora felt cold and suggested they go back to the estate. Once inside, the man showed her where the reception area and office were located, then took her to the greenhouse. There was a huge variety of beautiful flowers, which the girl enjoyed and admired more and more each time, because she had never seen such varieties. And by the time they reached the girl's chambers, 2 little children came running to them, having heard their conversations. Of course, the girl was very happy about this, but their older brother immediately became very serious and angry. He turned to them in a cold voice and asked what the matter was. But Fiora still couldn't understand why he was so cold towards them, because they were simply adorable. Green, immediately lowering his head, said that they wanted to apologize for what happened earlier, for the act that they committed. Lemon also bowed and said that she would like him to accept their sincere apologies, as they really didn't mean to anger him. The man sighed heavily and said that he was not angry at all and that they did not need to worry about it so much. As soon as the children heard this, they immediately lit up with joy. They were very pleased that their older brother was not angry with them after all. After that, he turned to the side and saw his older brother and sister there, saying that it concerned them too. The children were immediately very surprised when they realized that they had been exposed. They did not understand how he knew that they were there at all. However, Thomas and Ren still went forward to their younger brothers and sisters, and the man said that it was time for them to go to bed, so they should go to bed so that they could get a good night's sleep. The children immediately said that they would run to bed and wished him and the girl good night. Fiora waved goodbye to them and thought to herself that she would like to meet them as soon as possible. After all, they were simply the most wonderful children in this world. When the children left, the man turned to the girl and said that they should probably end it there too, because it was already late. After that, he took her hand and kissed her goodbye. Immediately after this kiss, he went to his chambers, which were located right next to hers. Meanwhile, Fiora managed to convince the maids that she could handle everything herself, and finally taking a bath, she was left alone with her thoughts and feelings. The hot bath with rose petals was incredibly relaxing for her, and luckily, she remembered some details from the book that were quite important. If you think about it, in the story itself, the fight for some reason kept his distance from his relatives. And the reason was that these children were from his matches, and his own mother died many years ago. The 24-year-old boy had difficulty accepting the harsh reality that awaited him after the death of his mother, and he bore a heavy burden as a duke and also as a guardian of other people's children. Of course, it's not hard to understand why he's so cold and distant. He must be focused on more important things that fell on his shoulders at a fairly early age. But still, they were still children, and they definitely needed love. And then suddenly Fiora appeared, who could give them the necessary attention, so she was going to give them all the love she had, so that these children would be happy. Soon, when it was deep night, the girl had already taken a bath and returned to her room, falling asleep. And then, when she had difficulty falling asleep, she suddenly woke up from some movements and felt warmth opposite her. As soon as she opened her eyes, She immediately saw Jasmine next to her and was a little surprised, but shared a blanket with the girl so that she would not freeze. She looked at the girl in surprise, and she suddenly turned to her through her sleep and called her mommy, and also asked her to hug her. Fiora was a little surprised, but she immediately calmed the girl down and said that she was nearby and that she shouldn't worry. The woman understood that this little girl was very lonely, so she wanted to console her at least a little. But soon, someone suddenly knocked on her door. She was very surprised and did not understand who could come to her at such a late hour. As soon as she gave permission to enter, the door opened and Ren appeared. She tearfully apologized for waking her up, but asked if Jasmine was there by any chance. The girl immediately said that she was right there and asked her to be quiet. After all, she was sleeping, and also said that if Ren wanted, he could join them. The girl immediately approached her and, lowering her head, asked for forgiveness for having to endure such inconvenience. She began to approach her sister and said that she would take her away so that she would not interfere anymore. But Fiora, smiling, said that it was generally not worth doing because she herself would like to be with Jasmine. The girl also assumed that this happened quite often because their mother used to live in this room. She also suggested that it was very difficult for Ren to wake up in the middle of the night every time and take Jasmine back to her. So Fiora, smiling, pointed to the empty seat next to her and suggested that they all sleep together. Ren immediately began to refuse. She said that it was not worth doing at all because it was wrong. But the woman said that she was only 8 years old and could still do that. She also smiled and added that she was no longer alone and did not have to keep everything to herself. Fiora extended her hand forward and told her to quickly get under the warm blanket because she could see that she was very cold. Soon the girl finally agreed to this. She climbed into her bed, and in this way they slept until the morning. It was a rather peaceful morning. Thanks to Ren and Jasmine, Fiora was so warm and cozy all night that she didn't even want to wake up. It was the first night in the new world, and it was just wonderful. So the girl decided that it was not she who was helping them, but the opposite. Ren soon woke up too. When she saw that the woman was no longer sleeping, she asked if she had gotten enough sleep at all. The girl, smiling, immediately said that of course she had slept well next to such little angels, and asked if she had dreamed anything pleasant that night. Ren, smiling happily, said that this was indeed so, and all thanks to the lady who allowed them to sleep together. Then Fiora suddenly clapped her hands and suggested driving out any bad feelings that might remain with a good, energetic workout. When the girl heard this, she was very surprised. She did not really understand what she was talking about, and the girl then said that she needed to do this every morning, and then she would be able to grow up quickly. At that moment, Fiora immediately began to smile, because it reminded her of the situation that always happened after nap time in kindergarten, and the girl began to show her her exercises. She pulled herself up to her left side and said that they needed to stretch all their muscles well. Ren, sitting on the bed, joyfully began to repeat all this after her. They continued to stretch like this for some time, but soon they heard some sobbing. Fiora immediately turned her head to the side and saw that it was Jasmine. She burst into tears and said that she was not her mommy. As soon as the woman saw this pitiful look, she was ready to burst into tears herself. But, looking at Jasmine more closely, she also noticed that the girl was on the verge of hysteria. And as a result, this really happened. The maid immediately came running to the scream and began to calm down my lady, asking why she was crying. Quite a lot of time had already passed, but Jasmine continued to cry and could not calm down. Fiora was already starting to worry. The woman had a very good method in her head. She didn't know if it would work, but she decided to check. So she got out of bed and went to the crying girl, asking her to listen to her carefully. Moving closer to the little girl's ear, she said that she was planning to have a tea party after breakfast, and she was having such a hard time deciding who to invite. She also said that there would be lots of delicious desserts. Already with him, when she heard about it, she immediately calmed down. Then the maid put her on the ground, and the girl began to follow Fiora. And the woman, in turn, stepped aside and began to speak thoughtfully about how she didn't know what to do. Only cheerful and happy people could be invited there. The little girl immediately began to raise her hand up and said that she needed to invite Jasmine because she was no longer crying and would be very cheerful. Fiora asked if she was sure she was done crying. The girl confirmed this and said that she would really like to go to this tea party. Ren also asked to be invited there as well, as she would like to attend this long-awaited tea party. Fiora smiled, took the girls by the hand, and said that of course they would all be invited. From her experience as a teacher, she knew very well that in order for a child to stop crying, you just need to distract him well. Soon they changed into clothes suitable for going outside and went out for a walk. The weather was just perfect for tea. It was sunny and very warm. However, just as they were about to head towards the gazebo where they wanted to have their tea party, Ren suddenly stopped and looked ahead in horror. The girl was so scared because she saw her older brother right in front of her and understood that he was going to scold her loudly again. Fiora herself had already stopped. She saw again that simply icy gaze from which one could turn into a statue. For a while, Breathtaking just stood there in silence, and soon he said that he was fine and asked if he could join them as they decided to take a walk. When the girl heard this, she was genuinely surprised. She couldn't even contain her emotions and asked again what he was even saying. She would, of course, like to refuse him, saying that it would be a day without parents. But as soon as she saw how much Jasmine and Ren's faces lit up, she simply couldn't hold back. She knew the girls were incredibly happy that he actually wanted to join in. So she explained that she had just been meaning to have tea with the kids and asked if he would join them. The man smiled and said that he would be happy to join in, since he had wanted to drink some well-brewed tea since the morning. And at that moment, as they were about to leave, other children ran up to them. It was Green and Lemon. They asked if they could join them, because they wanted to walk with them too. When Fiora heard this, she immediately looked at the man and noticed that he was a little confused. The girl assumed that he had never been in a situation like this before, so he simply did not know what to do. So she decided to take the initiative and, smiling, told the other children that for tea, the more the merrier, so they would be only too happy if they joined in. The smile on the man's face faded a little, and he told them to leave as soon as possible or the sun would go down. Just as they were about to move on, Baridas extended his hands forward to his children, and they did not understand what he wanted at all. The man even felt a little shy about this, and then explained that he thought they would want to hold hands. He explained his assumption by saying that they simply looked at him as if they really wanted it. Fiora immediately realized that he was much more considerate than she would have expected, which made her feel very good. Then Jasmine spoke up. She turned to her older brother and said that Green and Lemon wanted to hold hands too. She also said that she thought Breathtaking wanted to get closer to them. Of course, the man ended up taking their hands. However, the children felt very awkward and unusual because he usually did not show such attention to them, so they did not know how to react to this at all. Of course, from the outside it looked a little strange and unusual, but still, everything ended well. They reached the set table, which Fiora asked the maids to prepare in advance. They immediately poured themselves a mug of hot tea and began to talk. Meanwhile, the children ate sweets. Breathtaking turned to the girl and asked if she liked her quarters. The girl, smiling, immediately said that they were simply superb. Jasmine, hearing this, immediately picked up her fork with her dessert on it, and delighted, said that it was excellent. The girl also said, looking at Fiora, that they could be hers forever, and asked her not to leave them. She wanted them to live together forever. When the man heard this, he immediately became wary. He felt a little embarrassed by Jasmine's behavior. He was about to say something, but he didn't have time. And all because Fiora stroked her head, and with a smile on her face said that, of course, everything would be like this. She would stay with them, and they would all be happy. However, at that moment the butler approached them. He immediately turned to His Highness and asked for forgiveness for interrupting. Fiora quickly noticed this and realized that he was probably very busy, and therefore it was time for him to return to his business. But she thought it was very good that he still found time for them. Soon Breathtaking actually stood up from his seat and asked for forgiveness. He said that he had to leave already. The children were, of course, disappointed, especially Ren and Lemon. They had hoped that he would stay a little longer. Green at this point completely collapsed. He lowered his head and said in a sad voice that it was quite obvious that he hated them. He also said that the guy couldn't spend more time with them and quickly left, so that says it all. At this point, Jasmine got really angry. She looked at her brother and asked if he was an idiot. The guy immediately got angry and asked how she dared to say such a thing about her older brother. She had no respect at all. But the girl, proudly raising her head up, said that it didn't take a genius to understand that he wouldn't hold hands with someone he hated. Fiora agreed with Jasmine and told them with a smile on her face that he definitely didn't hate them. It was just that the Duke cared about them, even if he only showed it through his status and duties. Ren continued drinking her tea and said that of course it was true. He hadn't driven them away after their parents died, and that must have meant a lot. Lemon, seeing how upset her sister was, said that they still wished he was a little warmer towards them. She, of course, understood that he had many responsibilities and all that, but still, they were still children and needed that parental warmth. After such a sad note, they smiled happily and said that, despite all this, they still loved and appreciated him very much. Fiora, of course, was a little surprised that children at their young age could already think like this, and she felt even sadder about what was happening in their family. Ren asked Green not to make a mountain out of a molehill. After all, he has many responsibilities, so they should be independent, so as not to distract him from important matters. Then suddenly Jasmine, raising her hand up, asked what they were going to do next and what they were going to play. Lemon immediately suggested playing princesses. Ren, of course, supported her, but Green refused this idea and said that it was all for stupid girls. But the girls ignored his insult and began to play their part. Ren addressed her little sister, calling her a princess, and said that this tea was simply delicious. The children immediately began to behave politely, observing the rules of etiquette, and Lemon, smiling, said that she was very glad that he had come. Everything was to her taste. After that, she turned to Jasmine and said that it was a great honor for them to drink tea with the young princess. The little girl immediately smiled and thanked Princess Lemon, and also asked who the cute one was sitting next to them. The sister immediately turned her head towards Green and said that this was their favorite puppy. The boy immediately began to be indignant, not understanding why he should play an animal. The children continued to play and argue, and Fiora, watching all this, immediately giggled and was happy that they enjoyed this tea party. And after some time, she saw Thomas come out to them on the street. The girl was a little surprised by his appearance, but wished him good morning. The boy looked a little serious. He immediately approached the girl and, kissing her hand, wished good morning to Her Highness. Fiora, of course, thought it was very cute that he was trying to act like an adult. However, it was also a little sad because, like Ren, Thomas had no choice. They had to assume this role. Of course, she was very sorry that these children's childhood ended so quickly. At this point, Green turned to his older brother and told him to sit down and he would go. Lemon stood up, walking around her brother, and said that she had to go too because she couldn't let that mongrel wander around the estate alone. Jasmine, jumping out of her seat, also raised her hand up and said that she would show them where they needed to go, so she asked them all to follow her. Ren smiled happily and said that as a member of the Princess Club, she simply had to join them. So when the children left, Fiora was left alone with Thomas. She tried to break their awkward silence and asked if she should ask the maids to bring him some hot tea. The guy said in a very serious voice that there was absolutely no need to do this, and also said that she absolutely did not need to try so hard to be warmer to them. Fiora, when she heard this, immediately became wary. She could not believe that he actually said this. After a short silence, she turned to him in a trembling voice and asked why he was saying such a thing. The guy, clenching his fists under his table, said that he knew perfectly well that no one in that house needed them. Fiora was about to object to him, to say that this was not true at all and that everyone loved them, but he interrupted her. Thomas, hanging his head down, said that especially because she would marry his brother and bear her own children, they would become an even greater burden, and a woman, more than anyone else, should understand this perfectly. He also said that, of course, he did not want to be the head of that family, so he asked her to leave them and not try to make friends with the kids. The boy believed that they were no different from commoners, and therefore they were completely useless and harmless to people like her. Soon Fiora simply couldn't stand hearing these words. She stood up from her seat and quickly walked towards Thomas without saying a single word. And when the girl was already next to him, she was going to stroke his head, raising her hand up. But the boy was afraid that she would hit him now, so he immediately closed his eyes and moved his head to the side. However, Thomas did not feel any blow, and when he opened his eyes, he saw that she had placed her hands on his cheeks and pulled his head up so that he looked straight into her eyes. The girl turned red with disappointment. She could hardly hold back her tears and said that she would never get close to them just because of this. She looked Thomas straight in the eye and said in a trembling voice that it was perfectly normal that he couldn't trust her completely like that. But she didn't understand why he was saying that. Why denigrate himself? Thomas himself was already in tears. He said that he was denigrating himself because that was always the case. That's what he was talking about. No one needs them, children, so there's no point in trying so hard. Fiora couldn't help herself. She hugged Thomas and screamed, saying that she had never said such a thing and had never seen them in such a light. To her, they were just children who deserved love. They are not bastards or commoners, but simply children who want love and care from their guardians. At that moment, Thomas quickly pushed her away from him and, continuing to cry, asked who would ever love them like that. It was incredibly painful for the girl to hear all these words and to realize that he really believed in them. So, in a rough voice filled with confidence, she said that it should be his family. Thomas immediately laughed and asked what family? The one that never had a father and mother? The older brother who pretends they don't exist certainly won't be able to love them. But Fiora persisted. She said that his family was his younger brothers and sisters and asked if he didn't care about them at all. The boy looked her straight in the eyes for a while, then turned away and said that, of course, he was very worried about them. But at that moment, their conversation was interrupted by Jasmine's voice, who began to scream throughout the yard. The girl ran up to them and said that an evil sorcerer was chasing her, and behind her ran Green, who laughed and asked her to run as much as she wanted, but still could not hide from him. Jasmine quickly ran to her older brother and, jumping into his arms, asked Thomas to save her from this villain. Green had already run up to them by then. He started tickling her and said that it certainly wouldn't help her. The girl, who was very fond of this game, immediately laughed and said that she was attacked by a terrible sorcerer. So, turning to Prince Thomas, she asked him to help and defeat this villain. Meanwhile, Ren and Lemon also ran up. The older girl turned to her sister and said that this was definitely not right. They should intervene in all this. Seeing that their older brother didn't want to play with them at all, Ren said that Prince Thomas was too useless, and thus their Princess Jasmine would not survive. Of course, the boy felt unpleasant from these words. However, the girls in the meantime approached Green and said that the evil sorcerer would definitely answer for daring to tickle their dear princess. Lemon, smiling happily, said that they would tickle him to death in revenge. Green immediately became upset and said that 2 against 1 was very unfair. When Thomas saw all this, he could not contain his emotions and began to laugh loudly with sincere laughter. Through the gusts of joy, he asked the guys what they were talking about, because he did not understand a word. But soon, when the whole situation was explained to him, he turned to the respected princesses and asked if they would allow him to join such a great hunt for a sorcerer. The girls looked at each other happily and said that they would love for him to join them. Then Thomas got up from his seat and ran after his brother. The children ran and laughed happily, and soon they got tired, so they sat down on the ground to rest a little, because they had run around quite a bit. Fiora, who had been standing to the side all this time and watching what was happening, smiled happily and realized that they had played to their heart's content. At that moment, Thomas left his sisters and brother aside and approached the girl, saying that he would be lying if he said that he trusted her completely. However, since his family believed in her so much, he decided to give her one small chance too. Fiora, smiling happily, said that for her this was more than enough, so she thanked him for it. She took his hand and said that this would be the beginning of their beautiful friendship, and also told Thomas that she really appreciated his trust. And so 3 weeks passed from that moment. They did not communicate with Thomas very often, but Fiora noticed that he was able to pick up on her quite quickly. As for the rest, the girl became quite close to them, and they simply walked and talked about everything under the sun very often. And the knights finally returned from the capital. It was the order of the Chattel family, which was called the Flame. Like the other knights, the Flames were led by 2 divisions. The first were the Blades, who were the official knights, and the other section were the Guards, who were called upon to carry out any assignments and personally protect the Chattel family. And Fiora's personal guard was named Dayton, and he was the very same man who killed her at the very end in the original story. Her problem was that she couldn't remember exactly what Dayton looked like. Therefore, when the girl was supposed to meet him, She really hoped that she would understand who he was if she met him in person at official events. Of course, it wasn't just about saving her skin, but also for the sake of the children. Judging by his backstory, he had come a long way, and Daitin wasn't from an influential family. However, as soon as he was introduced to the girl, they would immediately start looking at him differently, so everything had to change. In fact, Daitin was a very unusual character. In history, he was a hereditary warrior. In addition, he could power his sword with a special mana, and only half a dozen people in the entire Tom world possessed such an ability. This power would awaken in him when Fiora attempted to take the heroine's life. However, perhaps if the girl was lucky, his ability might manifest while he was serving her. She believed that if she appointed him as her guard, she would have to meet Gray, who was the head of all the knights. That way, she could understand what a threat Fiora posed to him and take control of the situation. When the girl came up with all this, she was very happy, because it was really an ideal plan for her. Soon she called the maid to her, and when she came in, she immediately asked how she could be useful. The girl immediately turned to the maid and asked her to find Crimson and tell him that Fiora needed to meet with the guards. The maid was a little surprised by such a request, however. Having bowed, she immediately said that she would do everything, and then left. Some time passed from that moment, and Fiora finally went to the knight's training ground. Her butler accompanied her there. When the girl saw it, she was very surprised and said that she did not expect that this site would be so huge. The man smiled happily and said that this was indeed the largest place after the royal palace. And when they were about to go inside, Fiora suddenly heard some kind of cry behind her. When she turned her head to the side, she saw that it was Ren. The girl was very surprised, but immediately stopped and, leaning closer to the baby, asked what she was doing in this place. Ren smiled happily and said that she heard that the woman was going to the training ground, so she asked if she could go there with her. Fiora, smiling happily, said that of course she could, and also asked, would she really like to see Thomas in action? But the girl, smiling, said that it was not so. She just really liked fencing, so she wanted to watch it. Fiora immediately began to smile. After all, Ren had spoken of it very modestly and immediately blushed like a tomato. She thought it was very sweet and simply wonderful. So she smiled and said that it was very cool, so of course she allowed the girl to go with her. Of course, Ren was very good at music, but it's really cool that she's so curious at her age and would like to see and try out a lot of different hobbies. After some time, the three of them came to the training ground, where many knights were already doing their daily training. Fiora, looking around, was delighted because even for a normal training, they used real weapons that could seriously injure. She also thought it was very wonderful to see everything in reality. After all, before she had only read about it, but now she could see and even touch it all in real life. Soon Thomas saw Her Highness and his sister, so he joyfully called them and greeted them. The guy, still smiling, said that he was just wondering when they would arrive, so he started going down to them in order to greet them properly and talk. When he got downstairs, Fiora smiled and said that she really hoped they weren't distracting him from his training. They wouldn't get him into trouble. Thomas sighed heavily and said that he could actually afford to rest a little, so there was nothing wrong with it. At that moment, a man approached the boy from behind and, hugging him by the hair, said that Thomas wanted to show Her Highness and Lady Ren the surroundings of the training ground. The guy immediately became indignant and said that he wanted to show the surroundings to Ren and only to her. But when he realized how rude this sounded, he immediately turned to Her Highness and asked her not to misunderstand him. He could show her around too, since she had come after all. But Fiora, smiling, said that in fact she could handle it herself and that the two of them had better go ahead, since she was a little tired and would like to sit for a few minutes. Of course it wasn't true. She wanted to go with Thomas and cling to him like Velcro, because he was so cute when he tried to act like an adult. He said so. However, he still blushed, but she still decided not to embarrass him too much, so she let him go with his sister. Before leaving, Ren turned to her and waved her hand, saying that she would be back soon. Fiora, smiling, said that of course there was no problem, and by the time they returned, she would have already chosen a guard for herself. After the children left, the girl turned to the butler and asked if he could accompany them too. The man bowed and said that of course he would do everything as Her Highness said, and went after the children. At that moment, Fiora mentally apologized to the girl because she couldn't help Thomas. However, now she needed to concentrate on another person. At that moment, the same guy who had recently spoken to Thomas came closer to her and said that he had completely forgotten his manners and therefore had not introduced himself to the girl yet. So smiling, he said that he was very glad to be at her service and identified himself as the leader of the Order of the Flame, and his name was Grey Runner. As soon as the girl looked into his eyes, she was finally convinced that she absolutely did not want the story to actually go the original way. So she was ready to make any effort to change history and become the best nanny for these beautiful children who deserve it like no one else. Grey smiled and said that he had several candidates who were trained and skilled just for her situation. The guy said that they would have a competition to find out who was worthy of this service. However, the girl could also choose everything herself. Grey, hanging his head down, said that he would have been glad to accompany her, but unfortunately he had urgent business to attend to, so he had to leave her. When Fiora heard about this, she was immediately surprised and asked what urgent matters were being discussed. The man had no choice. No matter how much he wanted to answer, he had to. So he said that his mother was struggling with a serious illness at the time, so he had to stay with her for a while. The girl immediately felt awkward because she asked such an incorrect question. But she remembered that the original character was able to manipulate Grey through his sick mother. Knowing that his mother was terminally ill, she promised to provide her with treatment and simply took and used the man for her own selfish purposes. Although she knew nothing of her condition, let alone how she felt at all. While Fiora was playing various games with Grey, his mother's condition worsened and she suddenly passed away. However, this time the girl was not going to allow that to happen. She wanted to cure this sick woman and asked if he could tell her more about his mother's condition. She wanted to know about what she was eating and also what symptoms the woman had. Grey was a little surprised that she was asking about all this. However, he said that she often felt dizzy after eating, and her behavior had not changed much. However, he noticed that lately she was very drawn to sweets. As soon as Fiora heard this, she immediately thought about the various symptoms of illnesses and finally came to the conclusion about what it could be. So smiling, she asked if it was true that his mother felt thirstier than usual and had probably lost quite a bit of weight during this time. As soon as Grey heard this, he was very surprised. He already wanted to ask how she even guessed about all this, but said that it was really so, and even suggested that she had some kind of superpowers, because even the doctors did not immediately notice all this. But Fiora, since she lived in the modern world and dealt with children, she had to learn a fairly wide range of diseases, and she realized that Grey's mother most likely had diabetes. The girl also knew that the author of the book specifically described a real disease from the real world so that it would be more familiar to read and hear something like this. The girl immediately smiled. She was glad that Grey saw her in a completely different light at that moment. Of course, there was nothing special about it, but if it helped her achieve her goal, then a harmless game of charades would be very helpful. Then Fiora asked him to listen to her very carefully and heed all her advice. She told the guy to limit her sweets and take short walks after meals, and also give her whole grain black bread instead of white, and she should drink as much water as possible. Grey was very surprised when he heard this, and with caution in his voice he asked, "Was this really supposed to help her somehow magically?" The girl asked him to believe her after all. After all, if the woman did not feel better after her advice, she promised him that she would personally visit and check what the matter was. Grey said that he would still try and do everything as she ordered because he really loved his mother very much and did not want something terrible to happen to her. Fiora smiled at that moment. She, of course, mentally asked him for forgiveness because despite the fact that she was playing a show, she was still telling the real truth. So the woman should feel better after he followed her recommendations. Also, before they were about to leave, the man said that he would like to assign her a special escort to ensure that everything goes smoothly. He immediately called Ryu to him. When he came closer to them, he bowed before Her Highness and said that he was very pleased to meet her. This Ryu was a fairly strong, muscular man with brown hair. He was a trainer for new recruits. Fiora was a little surprised when she saw him, but she still didn't lose her head and said that she was very pleased to meet him and also gave her name. In fact, this man was just a giant compared to her. Gray, meanwhile, having bowed, asked their forgiveness and said that it was time for him to go. And the girl, before he left, said that she very much hoped that his mother would get better soon. After the commander left, Ryu looked at Her Highness and asked if she would allow him to take her to the candidates. Fiora asked him to stay a little longer, because she had promised Ren and Thomas that she would take them with her. The man looked at her a little suspiciously, but said that since she insisted, then of course they could wait. Fiora began to feel very uncomfortable about all of this. She didn't understand what was going on with this guy. She felt like she was doing everything completely wrong. But she also suggested that she had gotten that impression only because of his frightening appearance, or that it was just her imagination. After a while, Ryu turned around and asked her to sit down, because she might have to wait a long time, so there was no need to overload herself too much. The girl thanked him and took her seat. She decided to just wait a little, and then thought that everything would remain clear. It was still too early to draw any conclusions, because this man was not on her list of enemies. And then, after a while, Thomas ran into the room. He looked incredibly scared, and also out of breath because he had run so fast. The guy turned to Her Highness and said that they really needed her help. Fiora immediately began to worry. She asked the boy what had happened and why he looked so scared. The guy, meanwhile, said that Ren said she was going to go to the bathroom for a bit, and she never came back. And when he went to look for her, she wasn't there, and he hasn't been able to find her since. Thomas was very worried because there were a lot of dangerous weapons everywhere, and if Ren got hurt because of it, he would never forgive himself. The guy was incredibly angry with himself because, in his opinion, he should have been watching her very vigilantly. But Fiora took his hand and told him to calm down because nothing bad had happened yet. He didn't need to wind himself up like that. She said that right now they would get up and go look for her together. She was absolutely sure that Ren was fine, and they would definitely find her safe and sound. The boy burst into tears at that moment. However, as soon as he heard the encouraging words of his new guardian, he wiped away his tears and said with confidence in his voice that they would definitely find her. Fiora asked Ryu to inform the other knights about the situation so that everyone could start looking for poor Ren. She herself had already stood up and started walking around the training field looking for the girl along with Thomas. The woman understood that the girl could not have gone far, but she was already starting to panic a little, because she thought that she could really be wounded, and because of this, she could not respond or come to them. But soon Thomas came to the iron-closed door and told Her Highness that he heard someone, and these sounds came from the closed door. Fiora immediately assumed that it could be her, and she herself really hoped that it really was Ren, and that everything was fine with her. As soon as she opened the door, she immediately saw a little girl. Running up to her, she asked if everything was okay with her. Ren was sitting on the floor at the time, surrounded by someone else's blood and trying to stop the boy's bleeding. She turned to Fiora and said that the man was bleeding. The girl said in a trembling voice that she heard him groaning in pain and came as quickly as possible. She wanted to call for help, but she panicked and could not scream, and began to stop the bleeding herself. Fiora immediately came closer to her, and hugging her tightly, said that the girl was probably very scared, but she tried to cheer her up, saying that now everything would be fine. And she also praised her, saying that she was a great girl. Soon, Ryu came to them. He examined this warrior and said that he had a large wound near the head, but not fatal, and thanks to the first aid given in time, the bleeding stopped, so he would soon be fine. Fiora, when she heard these words, immediately smiled and told Ren that she was still a great girl and saved this guy's life. After this, she sat down and, turning to the two children, said that she had ordered the butler to look after them and asked where he had been when all this had happened. Then Ren, with a voice still trembling with fear, said that she was simply hungry, and that was why he had gone to look for food. The girl was also ready to swear that she would never go anywhere alone again, but always with the accompaniment of adults. However, at that moment, their heartfelt conversation was interrupted by the very same guy whose head had already been bandaged from where the blood was coming. He sat down on the ground, and the woman immediately noticed that he had come to his senses. As soon as the boy came to, he immediately called himself a real idiot. However, this was a very rude phrase, and Thomas, when he realized that he was about to swear, immediately covered his sister's ears so that she would not hear these words. Sopinar Yu, who was standing to the side, turned to the big guy and told him to watch his language, because Her Imperial Highness was right in front of him.